Thank you so much for joining today's episode of Politics for Parents, where I'm talking with Stephanie Wilson, the host of the Freedom Over Fascism podcast. And while I often say that this is a nonpartisan podcast where I don't typically advocate for particular candidates or parties, we really want to get into the issues and focus on which elected officials or actions can be taken to move those issues forward. However, I think the premise of this podcast is that we all have the ability to participate in our democracy, to advocate for policies we believe in that will make our lives and our lives for our families better, and to hold our elected officials accountable. That is really what, the foundation of a healthy democracy is. It's all of us participating, understanding our role, understanding how to advance our causes, and working together to do that. So, this discussion is a lot about what's on the ballot in November, especially in federal elections, but also many at the state level, where we do see that democracy is on the ballot. If you haven't heard about Project 2025, take a look. The Heritage Foundation and some other very, very right-leaning groups who work with the Trump campaign and will be involved in Trump's cabinet, will likely be involved, have authored this incredibly large plan that includes some pretty extreme changes and dismantling of institutions at the heart of our democracy and our ability to participate. And in some of the most extreme states, we already see that even those who stand up and resoundingly demand change, specifically, if you look at what's happened in Tennessee in their state legislature with the demands for gun reform after the Covenant school shooting. NPR has a really great podcast on that and a group of moms who organized around that. You already see places where people are waking up and realizing that our democracy is not what they thought it was. It's far more fragile. And this episode kind of gets into that. So thank you so much for joining. And I really hope, you find this discussion empowering.
So I'm Nicole Tate. Thank you so much for joining us on Politics for Parents today. And I'm really excited because we have Stephanie Gerber Wilson with us today, who is a mom. She is an entrepreneur with the founding of her own communications firm and host of the Freedom Over Fascism podcast. So thank you so much for joining us because I know you're really busy and you have a lot going on, especially being in the political space in this election year. Especially in the past few weeks, everyone's been busy. And I know you've been posting prolifically. So thank you for that. I'll read a little bit about your background, and then I just want to turn it over to you to hear about your journey and, what you have to share with all of our parent listeners to figure out, how they can get more involved and where they can make an impact with their limited or negligible free time.
Well, thank you so much, Nicole, for having me on.
Oh,
it's a real honor.
I'm very pleased you could take the time here because I know how valuable time is. So, Stephanie is a communication strategist for state and local campaigns. She specializes in values-based, freedom-focused messaging for the pro-democracy movement. Stephanie has 25 years of experience in strategic communications plus a history PhD. She appreciates alliteration, the Oxford comma, and the power of storytelling. And I have to say, Oxford comma is one of my favorite songs. I love Vampire Weekend for the fact that they even made a song about that.
I didn't know about the song, so clearly I have something to listen to.
There you go. There is a song called Oxford comma by Vampire Weekend. There's also a lot of really funny internet jokes about their songs and how they're all the same and a little bit elitist. But anyway, I like this song. So Stephanie, thank you so much for taking some time to spend with us. And I want to just kind of kick it over to you quickly, just because you have a really impressive background. You have a PhD. So, you've got your own career and a lot of different things going on. But on top of all of that, you've got the Freedom Over Fascism podcast, which has really developed quite a following. And I'd love to just hear, from you kind of about, your journey. How did you find yourself from being, a history PhD, having communications firm, into doing the work that you're doing now in advocacy and politics?
Well, my career has been one where it's taken a lot of twists and turns, and it wasn't where I started out in PR after college, and then I decided I needed to get a PhD, go back to graduate school. And so I did that for 7 years, and I worked in academia, and then I had to quit because of health reasons. So I took several years to try to get my health in order, and started a new company when I felt like I could handle it. And then, and that was mostly just making websites for small entrepreneurs. And then in 2020, having awoken to the fact that I could participate in politics around 2018, I joined the Biden Digital Coalition, and it was a parallel effort from the Biden campaign to spread the message of the Harris of the Biden-Harris candidacy on social media. And so I was the Facebook director, and we had every platform covered. It was volunteer. It was not from the campaign itself. And I realized that this is somewhere that I could really contribute. So after that, I started my own nonprofit called More Perfect Democracy. And that kind of rolled into my second nonprofit, which is Hoosier Victory Alliance, teamed up with someone from the Biden Digital Coalition. And I started working in Indiana. And I was a comms director on a state, a race for state house there. And that's where the podcast actually started. We had put the idea together to highlight that candidate's profile after she lost the election. But quickly it sort of shook out that it wasn't really her interest, it was more mine. So I took it in the direction of understanding the national political questions from a state perspective, or particularly a red state perspective, and understanding what's going on in red states for a national audience. And that has gradually sharpened so that I can help people figure out what they can do in their local areas. I can give organizers a platform, so maybe it'll spark some ideas for other people organizing. Mm-hmm. And I can talk to experts about the underpinnings of what we're seeing in politics right now. So that's where I am right now, is talking to a lot of different people that help organizers, that's my main audience, and activists understand the moment and understand how they can contribute to freedom and democracy.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. But I think one of the things that really resonates with me about you and your background is that, you haven't always been in politics, right? Like, you didn't just go to college in DC and get an internship on the Hill and I think sometimes people think, well, I'm mid-career or whatever. I don't really know anything about Washington. So how would I ever gain a foothold? And then on the other side, there's people that are like, yeah, I'd love to get more involved. But I can't just quit my job and be a full-time activist and go testify at my state capitol all the time. And you found a way to kind of do a little bit of both. I mean, you mentioned, some of the volunteer work you've done, which has now led to paid work, and using a skill set that you have. No doubt your PhD in history plays a role in, the work you do. So I think it's really great to highlight, parents like yourself who, have kind of navigated and done the juggling act we've all done and pivot to a way to make a career out of your passion. So I applaud that. But I know it's probably not been as easy as I made it sound just there.
No, it has a lot of twists and turns. And, I have a 16-year-old son right now. And I've learned since March of 2020 that planning is sometimes important, but sometimes a fool's errand, because you never know when a pandemic's going to pop up. And to be really opportunistic, during the pandemic, we were all home and doing everything virtually. I realized that there was a way that I could contribute from my house, still being really responsible about how I dealt with the pandemic, but turning into some way that I could participate without endangering myself or my family. So that was a big motivator for me.
Right. And I mean, I think also that just speaks to, I think, the way we were all forced a little bit to realize a new way of working. So many people have stuck with flex work. I know I have. And that's great for parents. And I think that's something that like you're tapping into a little bit, because one of the things I talk to a lot of candidates about specifically is you've got to find a way to make your events accessible to parents. Like no one's going to have or very few people I know are going to hire a babysitter so they can come to a rally on a weekend or go to a fundraiser. So you got to find a way to meet people where they are. And I think like this podcasting medium is a really great way to do that, because you have taken the time to put together some really great content, and then you put it out there for people to listen to when they can. And you have action items and things that people can do when they find the time. And I think when you're talking about a group of parents, I mean, that's the most critical piece. So if you could talk to a little bit more about the podcast, because as I'm learning, it takes a lot of time to do this and to promote it and to prepare. But I know you've kind of made the time to do it. Well, you probably also have like some, paying work that maybe is taking a backseat to the project you're working on now. So if you could just talk a little bit about how you think about prioritizing the podcast and, what you're really looking to achieve with it, near term, I'm sure in an election year, and then beyond that.
Well, I think I didn't have any idea how much work a podcast is, and I'm solo. So I said, let's do a podcast. And then I was like, oh, well, I need recording software and I need a host and I need to figure out a way to edit it. And then I have to figure out a way to like put it all together and music. And that took a while. And so I just jumped in. I didn't wait for it all to come. I just started putting out content. And I think that is sort of the key to getting into this, is like you just jump in. And at first you don't have a big audience, and maybe it's just your family, or maybe not in my case. And you keep putting out good content and people come. As for, prioritizing, I have my communications company, which more or less is the podcast right now. I've helped several state and local candidates, but most of my time with the communications is with the podcast. But my husband and I and another colleague founded a leadership development program for leaders in higher ed. So that's going on at the same time. But I get to use a lot of the same skills as, I've spent my life creating to participate in that. And I think that one of the things I like about podcasting the most is what you alluded to, which is you can listen when you're doing something else, right? Like, when do I listen to the most of the podcasts I listen to? In the car or doing dishes. And right. So you have video. I haven't quite managed that yet. That felt very daunting for a long time. I'm going to hope that I can get it going for my next season. But I love the fact that you could be doing something else and getting motivated and learning more as you're doing it.
Exactly. I certainly feel the same way. And I just want to kind of dive into a little bit about like the subject of your podcast. It's called Freedom Over Fascism. And while I am very committed to this space on politics for parents being nonpartisan, and that, I'm not just going to sit and promote one party or the other. I mean, I'm a Democrat, but I do challenge the Democrats, as much as I can on issues if I don't agree. And I think, this is a space to talk about issues aside from any party platform or particular candidate. It's really a space to get into issues. Having said that, though, I kind of want to highlight the subject of your podcast, and I think why so many people on either side of the spectrum are getting very involved. A few weeks ago in advance of the debate, I was listening to analysts talk about how people on either side are really increasingly concerned that, if the other side wins, if like the Trumpers, if Biden wins or the Biden folks, if Trump wins, are increasingly concerned that their way of life as they know it is over if the other guy wins. And, there's so much talk about polarization. We've discussed some of the work out of UCLA talking about the calcification of both camps. And, it does seem like this is a time where people are very scared. But we've got to kind of confront the reality of how detrimental that is to our democracy. It's not good for anyone if both sides have these views of the other. And if we feel like we're fighting against one another, meanwhile, there have been some really big degradations to institutional norms, to decorum, to public discourse. So I'd love to talk a little bit about, as a parent, what this all means to you and what you're kind of looking to achieve with the dialogue on your podcast, and kind of like how you're hoping that can maybe construct a better discourse and a better future for our kids.
Right. So the first thing I was talking to a friend lately, and she was talking about how she was, discussing politics with her kids, and she was worried that she was biasing them. And I think the first thing to think about when you think about politics is that it's about values.
Right.
It's politics is the way that we put our values into the world, and the way that we pass our values. One of the ways that we pass our values on to our children. So, so by taking it out of a strictly political lens and thinking about more of a transfer of values, I think that a lot of parents can relate to that because they spend, their kids' upbringing trying to make them into good adults with the values that they hold dear. So that's the first thing. It's about transmitting values. Another thing is that both sides, while calcified, are not the same. So one side is really trying to protect freedom and democracy, and the other one has very deliberately, over decades, tried to tear it down. And now we're seeing some of the ways that they're doing it. They've captured the Supreme Court. So now we have a ruling that has demolished several rulings that demolish the administrative state, takes away the power of the agencies to make policy. They've granted presidents complete immunity, which is completely 180% opposite of why this country was founded. So it's not just norms, it's also laws. And it's also the way that we think about the future. So we think about the future in terms of having a multicultural democracy where we are expanding freedom and bringing more people into the tent. Whereas the other side has put forward a plan called Project 2025, where they lay out exactly how they plan to take power away from the people and how they plan to create a fascist state. And it's actually not even hyperbole, because if you look at the history of fascism, they are taking their playbook from fascists all over the world.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's a level playing field. And also, it's a playing field where the media, particularly the mainstream legacy media, is letting the people down. So the most important things in public life are understanding what's actually going on and knowing the difference between opinion and fact. And right now, the mainstream people would probably have called it liberal media for a long time, is engaged, like New York Times, Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, are all engaging in opinion rather than reporting. So even over the last couple of weeks with this whole, should Biden step down, should it not? Almost nothing they said was backed up by actual reporting and real sources. It was all a narrative that they wanted to push. And there's lots of people that have lots of receipts. So I had a conversation with my mom last week on July 4th. And she's like, well, let's see how Biden does. I was like, Mom, we've had 3.5 years to see how Biden does. We know he's old. But the media has just constructed this narrative that it's really a problem right now. And they are misquoting people, and they are telling stories with dubious sourcing. And she said, well, there's a lot of people out there that want him to step down. And the thing is, there aren't a lot of people out there in America that want him to step down. It's that a lot of people in the media and the pundits and some people who have big platforms were pushing this narrative. But if you actually talk to people around the country, it wasn't the same thing. So I tried to talk to her about, what you get when you actually talk to your friends and people out there versus what you get when you are completely relying on a media source that you maybe thought was telling you the truth, but is full of misinformation. And in the case of far right-wing outlets, disinformation, which is knowingly spreading false information.
Yeah. I mean, that's so clear. I mean, it was incredibly clear. Even I remember during COVID, the media, the corporate media thrives in so many ways on drama and just freaking out climate. Look at climate doomerism and the headlines you see. And I think that's one of my drivers in starting this effort is that, we do lack like good discussion and solid information, informed discussion that's not beholden to some type of, corporate entity. Because you're right. I mean, the media has been having a field day with the Biden debate fallout, just as they had a field day with Donald Trump, right? Like his candidacy back in 2015, 2016, it was funny until it wasn't. And they gave him so much airtime for every crazy thing he said. And now we're just kind of living in that world. I mean, if you look at the debate and some of the things that were said there, he said twice, I think, that anyone who is pro-choice or pro-abortion rights is in favor of, he's talked about murdering babies after they're born. Right. Specifically, he said those words. And I'm like, why aren't we talking about that more? Because we just accept, that these lies and the misinformation are just kind of like part of the thing. And it's not interesting to anybody anymore. But what is interesting is, this fallout over Biden. So I grant you that. And then the other piece to this is that disinformation, right? Or just like the fact that we're all not even living in the same reality anymore.
Exactly.
I often say, I really miss debates with my Republican friends over like tax policy and social welfare programs. I miss like really hashing that stuff out because, I mean, there are so many complex issues we face and we really need to deal with those and not this like culture wars and the other stuff that's happening in the like mainstream dialogue that's really getting us absolutely nowhere. And in fact, when we're looking over there at like whether or not, your local library should have like a drag queen story hour, that all the while like childcare costs are going up. No one's doing anything about it. Our healthcare system continues to be completely dysfunctional. People are getting insane bills. Like the climate crisis is not being dealt with. So all these other things that really make it hard for families are just kind of sitting off to the side, and everyone's so distracted by just the circus.
Well,
So
actually, I want to say a thing about that because that's deliberate.
yeah,
That isn't just a circus. The media thrives on chaos.
Mhm.
And the right wing floods the zone with as much crap as they can to take our attention and divide it in 100 different ways. And while those culture war issues, some of them seem sort of ridiculous, it's really at core a way of thinking about the world. Do we want to see a world where everybody gets to love who they love and everybody gets to express their individuality the way they do?
Mhm.
Or do we want to live in a world where we are controlled? Do we want to live in a world where women have their own body control over their own bodies with their own physicians? Or do we want a world of misinformation about, saying that the Democrats are for infanticide? It's deliberate.
Mhm.
And it also is incredibly harmful in the real world because we're learning that abortion policy is not just about whether someone who gets pregnant unintentionally gets to have an abortion. It's about whether somebody who has an ectopic pregnancy, which is catastrophic, gets to have health care, and whether somebody who's having a miscarriage, which I had one, gets to have health care before they die or lose their fertility.
Mhm.
So I think thinking about it in a way that's understanding how we're being distracted in order for one side to gain power of the other,
Mhm.
and that those distractions are really the whole game. It's a fine line between saying I have one issue and I only vote on one issue. And so if my party doesn't stand strong on this issue, I'm not voting. Because right now, there's two ways we can go. In fact, in the red states, we're already there in a lot of different ways. So I think it's really important not to use the passive voice a lot when we're talking about this differing reality we all live in and differing outcomes because it's deliberate and they want to go even further. So, and I think that's one of the things for parents, right, is for ourselves, we need to learn to figure out what information source is real and fact-based and what is opinion. And we need to be able to teach our kids how to identify fact-based information versus opinion.
Mhm.
They're watching TikTok, they're watching YouTube. My kid watches YouTube all the time. How do I teach him about what's fact-based and what's not? What does nuance mean, right? Several things can be true at the same time.
Mhm.
And understanding where that nuance lies, I think is one of the ways that parents can really contribute to helping with the national conversation, because our conversation has been simplified to the point where learning how to appreciate nuance is lost. And another thing that parents can really do is think about what their kids are learning. And a lot of the country right now, they're not teaching civics at all. They're not teaching kids why to vote, where to vote, how to research, nothing like that. When I was in high school, I had a government class that taught all of that. And in a lot of states, particularly those that are captured by MAGA, they've eliminated entirely civics education. So that's one way that parents can contribute.
I will say in New Jersey, we actually have an organization that's focused on improving youth civics engagement. called Action Together New Jersey. Their executive director, my friend Wynn Kuhn, she helped get legislation passed last year here in New Jersey where 17-year-olds are going to be able to vote in the primary when they will be 18 for the general, which I think is awesome. And her organization also has a civics guide that they mail to newly registered 17-year-old, 18-year-old voters to increase youth participation and kind of fill that gap that you speak about, because you're right. We are not focusing on that. So many kids in high school, they're prepped for the SATs. I remember very well going through like AP exams, SAT 2s, all that. But I had no idea like what the mayor of my town did, right? Or what the different levels of government actually did, or what power I had as a voter. Mm-hmm. So, I completely get that. In fact, I didn't really get politically involved until I joined the college Republicans. I was a Republican back in the day. And that was kind of my first foray. And it was really party politics that got me involved and got to a point where I just said, well, I'm kind of done with the party stuff. I'd like to get back to an informed debate on issues. And to your point, yeah, I mean, I think on the right, I don't want to paint every Republican the same brush, because Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger are definitely different than Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? So there's different spectrums. But folks who aren't willing to accept like any type of data source, any type of like actual empirical standard. I remember having an argument, God, it was probably 10 years ago, with someone just when, was it? Yeah, it was 8-9 years ago when Trump was running. We were talking about the economy and jobs numbers, and we were talking about BLS data. And they told me, oh, well, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's just like made up. It's just lies. And I said, well, excuse me. I said, first of all, I have a master's in public policy. I've worked in economics research with the people who have worked at BLS, who have done those numbers. I've worked with people who work directly under Robert Reich. So they're not lies. Are there like some flaws to the data, just like any data set, any survey? Absolutely. But you can't just throw that out and just dismiss it as just a complete hoax. So, when I say I yearn for days where we could have constructive debates, it's about like, let's agree on like a common set of facts and then agree on how to construct policies to improve those. It's not just, let's enrage our base and let's just throw some stuff out there just to get people upset and then kind of like dust off our hands and walk away because now we've got people coming to the polls because they're so mad. So I appreciate your point, kind of raising that one side is kind of participating that very artfully and enraging people. And we really are living in a time where we are completely removed in so many ways from informed discussion. So now we've kind of gone through how messy things are. I'd love to talk about some of the wins, because you've had some wins. You're still doing this work. And I would love to talk about maybe a couple victories you've had and things that kind of can speak to the power of getting involved in advocacy and, motivating others to maybe think about trying their hand in some type of an issue that speaks to them.
I think one of the most important things that I have been involved in the last several years is the movement to run people at every level of politics, local, state, particularly. In many states, and in red states in particular, a lot of seats for the state legislature go uncontested. And we are finally starting to understand that even just having somebody run for a seat and asking people for their vote brings out more people, and then that filters up the ballot and gives more votes to the statewide races, the people at the top of the ticket, and for the national races. So I've talked to a lot of people who kind of are in this space. You've got the Every State Blue, which is in Ohio, and Tennessee and Texas and Missouri, and they are actively trying to get people to run for office in often forgotten places. You have Run for Something, who is putting out the call for young people to run and then helping them with training, with support. You've got Arena that trains candidates. You've got Contest Every Race out there recruiting candidates. You've got people, lots of different rural organizations recruiting young people of color to run in rural races. And I think the idea that local and state is often just as important as national is something that I'm really proud of having elevated the idea of. I also think that we talked about the media before. There are a lot of new initiatives to have local-based media and fact-based media that I'm trying to lift up to give people the idea that know where they can go for good information. And also sending out the idea out there, maybe to people who have a lot of money, that buying news, stations or publications is something that can be really important for the future. Just like Sinclair bought all of those stations on the right. So, that's like Courier Newsroom and Tara McGowan. So I think bringing these ideas to be much more, at the surface that people can see how important it is really one of the bigger wins that this podcast and, my advocacy work has done. And I helped, state candidate locally, a woman who's running for school committee. Those are really, really important. And that's where you can make the most difference, is locally and at the state level.
Yeah, I think, well, to your point about like local government, municipal and state government, I am hopeful that people start to realize more. And I think even just having a contested election, that gives people the sense that there is some accountability to be placed upon their incumbents and their elected officials. It gives the chance for candidates to debate issues. And that's, what this project is all about. It's all about empowering people with information on issues and getting them pumped up to say, you know what, I'm not happy with the way things are, and I'm going to go and talk to my electeds about passing legislation and tangible things that we can do to improve policies for families. Because, on both sides of the aisle, we just haven't done enough. And I think, contested elections are absolutely number one. And also getting people's attention just by having somebody who is running and knocking on those doors and having canvassers on those doors and having phone banks and fundraisers, getting people engaged is incredibly valuable. And when it comes to news, another thing is there's so many new outlets out there that are public. I mean, I support NPR. I support ProPublica, a great new outlet, women-led. The 19th is just awesome. And, I always tell people, listen, just pay for the subscription. Maybe instead of Hulu or instead of something else, like invest in news. It matters. It matters that we have quality media that is not biased and not owned by a corporation that's going to just pump out dramatic headlines and clickbait. We have a local outlet here in Red Bank Green, love those guys, and a young guy did buy it because it was going to be sold, I think, perhaps to a larger organization or maybe just sunset. And he just invested, and he's working so hard to keep it going and make it profitable. And everyone in our town benefits from it because it's a really great local source of news. And in New Jersey, we have a really tough media landscape because we're split between New York and Philadelphia. So we don't have a major, media like network here. So that's a point well taken. So I guess I always try to kind of, end these with a call to action to listeners. I want people to kind of get some information and act upon it afterwards and get engaged. So I'd love to talk to you, since you're kind of so well versed in every level of government and national politics. Where do you think are some policies that there is an opportunity for parents to get involved on and actually implement change? For me, one issue I care deeply about is childcare and the cost of childcare. And I'm happy to report that before coming here, I was watching a Senate Finance Committee hearing that took place this morning on childcare. And I will say that both the Republican and the Democrat leading the hearing actually had pretty cogent policy solutions that they were advocating for. And it was a really serious discussion, which you don't always see on Capitol Hill. So for any parents that care about childcare, I'll put in the show notes what that hearing is and what they're advocating for. But I'd love from you a couple tangible examples of where you think people can get involved.
I think one of the easiest things to do is to get educated. And you can, there's all these sources that you talked about, the 19th, ProPublica, Courier Newsroom, your local places. Get educated and then just talk to your friends, right? Learn what Project 2025 is, and then talk to the people you know in your community, because people trust people they know, right? So, maybe your bubble of friends is sort of all like-minded, but maybe your hairdresser isn't, maybe it's, your babysitter, maybe it's your across the street neighbor, where particularly Project 2025 and what Trump plans is not known. So just talking to your friends about issues that you care about getting the word out about what's going on in your town or your state or at the national level, that is one of the very most important things you can do. Because that's how you get, it's called relational organizing. And that's one of the most effective ways to organize people. And another thing that I think is really important is the working with young people to really understand what's going on in the system and how they can help. And as parents, you've got a young person in your house, right? So, or maybe not, maybe they're off at college and you're empty nesting and you're not talking to them every day. But there's a really great opportunity to share your values and what's going on in the world. I mean, my son has to live with me, so he gets a lot more than he bargained for. But there have been many, many times where we've talked about an issue over the dinner table, and he's gone back to his friends and said, here's a podcast that can tell you all about it. I mean, or, here's where you can read more about trans rights, or here's how you can really think much more nuanced way about, this international issue. So I think starting with your kids, and if they're young, it's just about values. One of the people I most respect in public service said that at its best, politics is soulcraft, because it's absolutely positively about the things that we care most about in the world, and how are we going to share our values and our priorities to get the things that we think are really important out there to our kids, to our communities, and to the people who could benefit the most from it. So listen to my podcast and read my Substack at freedomoverfascism.us, where I talk about a lot of these things. But I think those are a couple of the places that are just really simple, not easy, to start from.
Well, those are, I would say I don't know that they're simple. They're meaningful though. They're really meaningful. And I love that explanation. You've mentioned a few groups already, but if folks are interested in kind of signing up for maybe a few newsletters or following some groups or candidates, I'd love for you just to leave us with a couple of your favorite advocacy groups that are working on issues right now that you think are doing really, really good work that people might want to consider following or donating to. Or given this is an election year, are there any candidates on the ballot that you think are really strong on family issues that folks might want to take a look at their platforms and consider following and supporting?
Well, I think first on the candidate front,
Mm-hmm.
there's a person who I had on my podcast who I've been following on Twitter for years. It's called blue24.org.
Mm-hmm.
And he has links to almost every candidate in the country. And there are a couple ways to think, and he doesn't take any money. It just goes straight to their Act Blues. So there's a couple ways to think about this. You can think about, okay, well, the presidency is a must win. It doesn't take care of everything, but it's non-negotiable. So you could give money to Biden and Harris, but also think about your state level representative, because people running for state office are often running on very low budgets, and they don't have the resources they need. And that can make so much difference in your daily life, so much more actually than president, except for we have to win this election. So focusing on your local and your state candidates is where I would focus. And then as for advocacy groups, I really like the ones that are trying to change the structure of politics and to build power. So that means run for something, contest every race, arena. That means a lot of the reproductive justice organizations. There's in Virginia, Center for Common Ground, where they try to help bring people of color to the polls by providing what communities need in the context of participation in democracy. So I think that things that are really about changing the balance of power in this country is where I think the focus can really make a lot of difference.
Great. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. You've given us so much really thought-provoking information, and I definitely encourage everyone to follow your Substack, follow your podcast. It's a really pivotal moment. And I think, we can't be too polite about what is at stake, because we can kind of, I think in November we can either buy ourselves some time by defeating Trump and improving our democracy, or we could frankly just kind of like throw it all out. And who knows what's next. So appreciate everything you're doing, and I appreciate your time with us, and thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a great discussion. And, anybody, if you're out there listening, you can reach me at the Substack, and I'd love to hear about what you're doing out in your local areas.